Even in the best situations, dealing with the government can be tricky. So accuse the government of causing an accident or injury, and you can bet it's going to be a tough road. Here to tell us more about the Governmental Immunity Act is attorney Phil Harding from Harding & Associates, who's here to answer your legal questions every Friday. So we're talking about suing the government. As I was reading this, I'm like, does anyone ever win when they're suing the government?
It's an interesting question. Yeah. Yes, they do. I've handled some cases, but the reason why we're talking about this here today, it's called the Governmental Immunity Act. And a lot of people refer to it as the GIA. And there is a really short time frame that you have to notify the government. And essentially, this is going to give you the ticket to file a lawsuit. And under the GIA, if you don't notify the government within 180 days of them doing some act that caused your injury, then you don't get a ticket to file a lawsuit. And so that's why it's really important to go in and to talk about this. And I know that we talked last week a little bit about next month I'm teaching attorneys different things. And I'm also teaching them obviously about the GIA, the Governmental Immunity Act, and why it's so important to look at this and talk about this. Because let's say you're in a car accident and you're not really sure if someone who ran into you, it works for a city, local, or state, you have to give them this notice. Because generally, as you know, with a lawsuit, let's talk about a lawsuit specifically under a car accident. You have a 3-year statute of limitations, but if you don't give the GIA, if you don't give this notice, you don't get a right to even use that 3-year statute of limitations.
So why such a short amount of time?
Well,
why do they have that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reason why it's so short, remember we came from England, right? We came over here?
Yes, I recall.
Yeah. And with coming from England, we took some of their laws, and if you remember, there's a saying, or there used to be in England, that the king could do no wrong. And here the king is our government. And so essentially you can only sue the government for certain exceptions when they're doing maintenance, when they're going through different things. But there's a specific statute that I want to talk about so that we can look at and talk about this statute under the GIA. And so let's look at that. And essentially the GIA statute specifically says that you have to give notice. And it says any person claiming to have suffered an injury by a public entity or an employee thereof while in the course of such employment. So if someone's out there and they're, if it's a government employee and he's Saturday driving by, you know, taking his kids and gets in a wreck with you, obviously you don't have to give a notice in that. But if they're in their scope of employment, you shall file a notice as provided in this section within 180 days. So let's talk about this notice and what needs to go into that.
Yeah, what do you have to include?
Well, it's very specific, and the reason why the government makes it so specific is you have to go down and you have to give them not only specific notice as to when it took place, who it was that caused the injury, what are your injuries, what are you asking for, but then you have to send it to the right entity. One of them is you send it to the Attorney General, which is kind of a coverall. Another one, let's talk about a specific here. For example, let's talk about the Aurora shooting.
Yeah, this is a good one to bring up.
It is. Now there have been allegations against the University of Colorado. Don't know if that's going to play out true or false, but people, just to protect their rights, have to send this notice to the regents of the University of Colorado, and then they have to set forth essentially what they think the university did, or what an employee of the university did or did not do in this Aurora shooting.
And they have limited time. They
do. As a matter of fact, the 180 days on that notification occurred probably just a couple days ago. So it's important to do that. You know, another thing to know is on some of these cases, I've actually had a couple cases that have gone up, not only the Court of Appeals, but Supreme Court on this. I don't know if you remember, but there was a 600-pound boulder that fell down on a bus going up to Central City in Blackhawk. At that point, I represented one of the individuals, and we dug into it and we found out a little bit about the maintenance of that roadway. And so we made some allegations regarding did CDOT do enough to prevent this.
And someone had been hurt previously, just a couple hours or a day before?
Yeah, and that's an interesting point to bring up on that. Almost 12 hours before, on that same stretch of highway, there was another bus that there was a wreck that took place. So the Governmental Immunity Act is what we're talking about. And what's good, again, because the viewers watch this show, they now know more than most attorneys about the GIA Act. So if an accident occurs, you need to hop on it right away. You got 180 days, no more.
Okay, I always feel smarter after interviewing you, so I'm sure the viewers feel the same.
Well, good.
Well, if you have any legal questions for Phil, he wants to hear from you. Just log on to coloradosbest.tv, look for his photo and click there. You can submit your legal questions and he takes the time to answer them personally. He might even address your question right here on Colorado's Best. And if you'd like to contact Phil at his office, Harding & Associates, the number's 303-762-9500, or you can reach him online at hlaw.org. Coming up